lecturer, we have today our last lecturer in this series of lectures to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the philosophy club. His name is Professor Alessandro Topa. Dr. Topa is a visiting assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy. He received his MA and PhD from the Rheinische Friedrich Wilhelms University in Bonn, in Germany, and he joined our department in September 2009. His current research is focused on the logical origin of the categories in Immanuel Kant's critique of pure reason, if that tells you something. But this is already a simplified version of the original formulation, and on the study of the foundations of the theory of science and semiotics in Charles Sanders Peirce. Besides these specializations, he is particularly interested in the philosophy of the media, and his publications cover both the realm of academic philosophy and of intellectual journalism. Last but not least, he is a very devoted and generous teacher, as anybody can witness whoever passes by his office and sees the crowds of students in there. In our last colloquium, he gave a talk on the philosophical interest in culture. And today, the subject of his talk is there progress in philosophy? Now, I let him now both explain the question to us and hopefully give us an answer. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot, dear Stefan, for the very kind introduction. Are you hearing me through the...
Switch on the mic.
I mean, my voice is loud enough like that, basically.
For the camera.
If you prefer it this room. No, it's not the Maybe now, yes. Here you go. Yes, is there progress in philosophy? Socrates and Peirce on the normativity of logic. I will try to gradually lead you to be able to understand what I'm interested in. Shouldn't take us too long to get to this point. But I would first like to say a few words about, first of all, my thankfulness for the opportunity to be able to speak here. Thanks to the philosophy department, to the philosophy club, and to Gavin and to Safinez with a lot of effort have been, being the motors of this very beautiful and interesting series of talks we have been able to enjoy in the last couple of months. Moreover, I would like to thank my Phil to 221 students course on informal logic. I gave, I think it was last semester, not all of them are here obviously, but during that course I had the opportunity to discuss some texts which I personally find interesting. And I was very happy to see that the students with great devotion and intellectual curiosity, together with me, wandered through, well, parts of Aristotle's Organon and also Stephen Talmin's The Uses of Arguments, which is a very important book for, philosophical reassessment of logic in the 20th century. It was the beginning of so-called informal logic. Yes. Before we start, I feel obliged to also address Piero della Francesca, who is the painter of the picture we so far have been misusing, because it was only instrumentalized for the sake of getting you here. And I originally planned to have a longer section on the philosophical reflection on the concept of progress in this paper, but it turned out to it would have been too much. So just briefly, as an introduction to the topic, I find that image, picture very, very fascinating, and I know that the quality is not very good, but I think you can see enough in the sense to briefly get in touch with the image and what it conveys. I mean, I'm not going to interpret it because this is a very arduous task. Piero della Francesca was born in 1415 and died in the year Columbus discovered America. And if I briefly may describe what I see the face of a woman who is in deep sorrow. I would say literally her flesh is in deep sorrow, but she's not letting go. She's exerting some kind of infinitely soft self-control. And this on the one hand, this self-control on the one hand, it aims at accepting something. But on the other hand, out of this self-control, which is the self-control of reflection, results an insight into the acceptance of something which threatens to destroy her individuality. As a matter of fact, this is a picture of Virgin Mary, and it is one of the few images that represent her as a pregnant woman. And she's shown in her radical subjectivity in this image. And again, the image is from 1450, so the middle of the 15th century. And I imagined that Piero della Francesca invites the beholder to reflect on the concept of progress as an idea necessitating individual loss for the sake of collective progress. If you take a look at the picture once you have a quiet moment, you might do that. And I'll leave it to your own judgment which stance Piero takes by displaying the tragedy of Mary, because, as you all know, she will be losing her son in a quite horrible way. I'm in doubt what Piero is saying about that, but I think that this image represents an early version, an early reflection in European history of ideas, where, so to say, the concept of progress is reflected. I mean, it starts in the history of philosophy with Renaissance writers, and most of all with Francis Bacon. But it is in this period that progress becomes a philosophical problem, and a lot of problems tend to forget that the concept of progress is deeply rooted in philosophical reflection. So, yeah, that much about this image, which was meant to somehow set the emotional stage. I look forward to seeing it in the summer break, 100 kilometers southeast of Florence in Monterchio, and we'll now turn to the subject matter of today's talk by gradually introducing to it. In order to define a minimal requirement for, it might be better to keep it in my hand. Yes, sorry. In order to define a minimal requirement for the use of the predicator philosophical progress, we may assume that within a certain philosophical discourse, development is taking place, which allows us to say that an answer given to a specific question at the moment T2 within the theoretical framework B is systematically more satisfactory, rationally compelling, and articulated with greater clarity than another answer given at the moment T1 within the theoretical framework A. We need some kind of elucidation of the idea of what progress could possibly mean, and this is meant to specify what are the minimal requirements of that. Note that the opposite is not excluded. Just because someone works on a problem at a later point of time is not necessarily the more profound theoretician, obviously. In this sense, Kant's account of causality, or the origin of our representations of space and time, is superior to Hume's and Locke's empiristic accounts because it points out contradictions arising in the theoretical frameworks, which are both explained and overcome within the framework of transcendental philosophy, which is therefore systematically more satisfactory and rationally compelling, at least as far as these two questions mentioned are concerned, but most probably concerning much more. So far, so good. This much confidence I do have in philosophical progress. But if we venture fourthly to compare two answers being given to a specific philosophical question within the horizon of two distinct epochs of philosophical thought, in the sense of global assumptions constitutive for a principal philosophical outlook, then I start to doubt the legitimation to speak of one answer being superior to another. And this is even more so when we fifthly do not speak about the answers being given to a specific question, but rather go that far as to claim that German idealism or naturalistic positions reflecting the worldview of the empirical sciences represent a superior stage of philosophical theory in comparison to preceding epochs. But I think that it's quite simple to say that philosophical progress is occurring if we are focusing on the individual development of one thinker. If we are developing that idea by instantiating the two things that have to be brought into relation by referring to one thinker and another thinker, and even if we're thinking about two philosophical schools being compared, we quite often and naturally see one position as superior to another, and we have good reasons to do so. The problem arises when we're, so to say, speaking on the level of epochs, or even the problem becomes even more, deep when we are claiming that philosophy in general, not concerning one individual problem, but as a whole of one epoch, is superior to the philosophy of another epoch. So short and sweet, there are definitely types of philosophical progress. The problems start when we start to speak of things that are, so to say, overarching epochs of philosophical thought. Against this view, particularly Heidegger has advocated a position which doubts the assumptions of historical continuity taken for granted in the idea of scientific progress, as first articulated by Francis Bacon in his Novum Organum, 1620. In his Die Zeit des Weltbildes, Heidegger claims that in the same way that it would be absurd to maintain that Shakespeare's poetry is more advanced than that of Aeschylus, it is still more impossible, quote, to say that the modern understanding of whatever is, the modern understanding of being, is more correct than that of the Greeks, quote end. Like all expressions of our fundamental relations to the world, philosophical theories belonging to different epochs might differ qualitatively and therefore radically in the sense of being expressions of different modes of being related to a living world constituted in feelings, practices, thoughts, and guiding interests connecting them. So far I'm following Heidegger's lead here. And I do not doubt that Heidegger's position is a necessary corrective for the narcissism of our techno-scientific worldview with its reduction of rationality to its instrumental dimension. But, on the other hand, I think that this quite radical position should not exclude the possibility of a genuine type of philosophical progress which spans over epochs and achieves to articulate an idea with greater clarity, which initially manifested itself only implicitly. There might be a form of progress, the reflection on which brings into contiguity worldviews which are worlds apart, but nonetheless part of the dialogue human rationality essentially is. In this sense, Kant, for example, introduces the Platonic concept of idea in the Critique of Pure Reason by remarking that he is not interested to investigate, quote, the sense which the sublime philosopher combined with his word, quote, but rather aims at a critical reinterpretation, which is legitimate insofar as, quote, it is not at all unusual to find that we understand an author even better than he understood himself. This is what Kant says. He says, it is not at all unusual to find that we understand an author even better than he understood himself. And the example given basically illustrates that Kant assumes that it's possible to have a philosophical progress which is overarching epochs of thought. In what follows, I would like to explore whether there is this kind of progress Kant assumes to exist. As he suggests anyhow, this progress occurs only when one answer or conception can be seen as an articulation, a making explicit of potentials contained in the other one. Accordingly, I propose to track the movement from an initial, conceptually not explicitly reflected, but nonetheless substantial and efficient idea of the normativity of logic in Plato's Socrates, to a full-fledged, conceptually reflected and systematically articulated account of it in Peirce's theory of the normative sciences. Yeah, so this is the big plan. Big because it might not be what we can do in the framework of the time that we have, but I'm trying to hurry up. Before I proceed to explain more in detail what the expression normativity of logic means, let me first quote two fascinating passages that are meant to emotionally set the stage for the complex distinctions that will busy us. In the Apology, Socrates at one point imagines to be set free under the condition that he stops philosophizing. It is one of the few passages in which the word philosophy is used, and it contains a self-portrait of Socrates' philosophical activity. Socrates there says, "Oh my friend, why do you, who is a citizen of the great and mighty and wise city of Athens, care so much about laying up the greatest amount of money and honor and reputation, and so little about wisdom and truth and the greatest improvement of the soul, which you never regard or heed at all? Are you not ashamed of this?" And if the person with whom I am arguing says, "Yes, but I do care," I do not depart or let him go at once. I interrogate and examine and cross-examine him. And if I think that he has no virtue, but only says that he has, I reproach him with undervaluing the greater and overvaluing the less. For this is the command of God, as I would have you know, and I believe that to this day no greater good has ever happened in the state than my service to the God. For I do nothing but go about persuading you all, old and young alike, not to take thought for your persons and your properties, but first and chiefly to care about the greatest improvement of the soul. I tell you that virtue is not given by money, but that from virtue comes money and every other good for man, public as well as private. This is my teaching. This passage is, I think, everyone agrees, essential for the Apology. If you take it out of it, it breaks down as a philosophical text. Note that Socrates' dialectic activity is prompted by someone claiming that it is not true that he is not caring about virtue. I do care about virtue, Arete, the anonymous Athenian says. The best strategy to get rid of Socrates then seems to be to deny any interest in virtue. In a passage of a text called The Doctrine of Chances, dealing with the importance of the theory of probability for logic of induction, Peirce in the late 1870s writes, "It seems to me that we are driven to this, that logicality inexorably requires that our interests shall not be limited. They must not stop at our own fate, but must embrace the whole community. This community, again, must not be limited, but must extend to all races of beings with whom we can come into immediate or mediate intellectual relation. He who would not sacrifice his own soul to save the whole world is, as it seems to me, illogical in all his inferences collectively. Logic is rooted in the social principle." That's basically the idea that expresses what the normativity of logic and its dependence on ethics means. In what follows, we shall explore how these three ideas are connected to each other. The idea of community, the idea of identifying our interest with the interest of other human beings, and the idea of a reasoner that needs to follow rules if he wants to be a logical reasoner, who needs to follow ethical rules if he wants to be a logical reasoner. Now let me proceed to say some elementary things about the normativity of logic, or rather about the claim that logic is normative. What does it mean? It normally means that logic is not a science dealing with psychological descriptions and laws of how, as a matter of fact, we think, but rather a science which inquires how we ought to think, as Kant says in his logic lectures. The Critique of Pure Reason gives the same definition of what there is called general pure logic, as opposed to a general applied logic. The latter being nothing else but a psychological logic describing empirically how human beings think. The first one being a canon of the understanding and reason, which has to do with strictly a priori principles. A canon defines the principles according to which something is used in order to achieve a specific goal. What is used here is our intellect, and the goal of its logical use consists in the production of coherent representations that meet the formal requirement of truth. These requirements, reflected in the principles of logic, are a priori, consequently independent of experience, because they analytically specify the necessary conditions that need to be met in order to qualify representations as such to be capable of expressing truth. In his Minute Logic of 1902, Peirce goes at least one step further than Kant. Logic, according to him, is normative not only because it identifies the formal standards of thought. It is normative because, quote, it is impossible to be thoroughly and rationally logical except upon an ethical basis. In other words, to think logically presupposes a certain self-understanding of the reasoner as a moral being. Consequently, logic as a science for the late Peirce will be dependent on ethics. Yeah, now I'm moving to Socrates, then to Peirce. So first, of course, I need to make a bit clear what I mean with Socrates' ideas about the ethos of logos. Before we can move to Socrates, a clarification is in order, since the claim that Socrates, as we know him through Plato, and Plato himself, have something meaningful to say about the normativity of logic, could appear to be based on serious historical misconceptions and blunders. As is pointed out by Joseph Bochansky and other historians of logic, logic is a concept that does not emerge before late antiquity. Aristotle from time to time uses only the adjective logikos, and when he uses it, it qualifies something as plausible or as argumentatively reasonable. Consequently, the question how we can pretend from Socrates, a man of the 5th century before Christ, to say something about logic needs to be addressed immediately. If the even more ambitious endeavor to learn something about the normativity of logic from him shall not seem as absurd as a desire to learn something about the safety norms of civic aviation from Leonardo da Vinci. As Aristotle's Organon shows, the absence of a term such as logic that circumscribes a specific realm of theoretical interest on our map of systematized knowledge does not imply the absence of a field of research which, under a different title and motivated by interests which do, to some extent, which are different to some extent from our interests, in large part overlaps with ours. As a matter of fact, Aristotle's writings of logical relevance comprehend a territory the vastness of which is, by far exceeds the restricted understanding of logic most modern philosophers, from Descartes' disavowal of logic to Kant's revival, have cultivated. His writings and his terminology distinguish between and thus reveal his interest in 3 domains of argumentative use of logos, namely in scientific demonstrations, dialectical disputes, and public speeches. The history of logic might have developed differently if his first editor, Andronikos of Rhodos, had decided to include Aristotle's Rhetorica in what was then called the Organon, so the tool for scientific inquiry. Aristotle, however, was motivated by an overarching interest in different processes of argumentation and practices through which human beings produce justified beliefs and influence each other's thoughts. Hence, he was interested in a general theory of argumentation. This theory has its logical kernel in the taxonomy and formal account of patterns of reasoning Analytica a priori offers, in order to highlight the independence or the validity from the matter reasoned about. Plato's contribution to logic is far more difficult to assess. Firstly, it was only with the application of quantitative stylometry to the problem of determining the historical sequence in which Plato had written his dialogues that it became possible to thematize the origin and growth of Plato's logic, as Lutoslawski did in his monograph published in 1897. And this book by Lutoslawski on the development of logic was thoroughly studied by Peirce, and is one of the main reasons why at some point in his career he started to read again Plato and Aristotle. Secondly, whereas it is possible to relate most elements of Aristotle's logical work to our nowadays map of the discipline of logic, the same is not at all true of Plato. As William and Martha Neal observe in their history of logic, while his dialogues contain much logical material, none of them is purely logical in content, which might tentatively lead us to conclude that although he is undoubtedly the first great thinker in the field of philosophy of logic, as the Neal say, Plato was perhaps averse to the study of formal logic for its own sake. Joseph Bochensky arrives at a similar verdict when he writes that, quote, formal logic is reserved for Aristotle, quote, end. Although, quote, a close examination of the contents of his logical works assures us that everything contained in the organum is conditioned in one way or another by the practice of Platonism, quote, end. This distinction drawn between philosophy of logic on the one hand and formal logic on the other hand has the advantage of rendering more intelligible Aristotle's statement at the end of his Topics, where he evaluates to which extent his theory of reasoning and fallacies had been prepared by predecessors. He says nothing existed at all. And this is surprising because it is obvious that Plato's theory of logical division, his analysis of truth and falsehood as properties of belief in the Theaetetus, the further development of this within the framework of the theory of elementary propositions in the Sophistes, which moreover presumes the disambiguation between predication and identification introduced in the same dialogue, has prepared the work of his pupil Aristotle. Plato's philosophy of logic, quote, made possible the emergence of the science with Aristotle, quote, end, writes Bochensky. And it should be emphasized that it is easy to underestimate the foundations Plato contributed, since we often can hardly think of an alternative to those foundations he laid down. It seems trivial to point out, for example, that Aristotle's ambition in prior analytics is to provide us with a complete account of all universally valid forms of deductive inference. But this remains trivial only as long as we forget that the idea of logic as a science that distinguishes between universally valid and universally invalid patterns of argumentation presumes the notion of universally valid law, established within the context of Plato's theory of ideas. As Bochensky acutely observes, this theory, first and foremost, the theory of ideas, first and foremost discloses the possibility, quote, to rise to the standpoint of universal validity, quote, end. In a way, Plato's contribution to logic is so imponderable because it is rooted in something which Bochensky, with great care for his choice of words, calls a standpoint. The standpoint of theoria, a standpoint which not only establishes a new relation between man and the cosmos, but also between men themselves. There are, of course, various traditions that work together in the Platonic rising to that standpoint. The Eleatic school, with its anti-sensualistic dialectics of the one, the Pythagorean tradition with interest in mathematics, the sophistic Enlightenment, and, historically speaking, a culturally growing need to justify beliefs where more and more individuals have their say. So I'm referring to the arising of more democratically governed city-states. Still, none of these traditions have the same impact on Plato's ascent to theoria as the Socratic art of dialogue. What characterizes the Socratic dialogue is a specific form of communication. According to Plato, whose dialectic always remains rooted in the soil of the Socratic conversation, as his critique of writing in the Phaedros and the seventh letter elucidate, the dialogue is the only form of communication in which the truth can appear. It appears as something you and me share, which is outlined in its intelligibility through our agreement. This agreement has been made possible and is motivated by the symmetry of dialogical communication, where speaker and listener can criticize each other's positions, because they can exchange roles and moreover reflexively thematize the content and the method of what they have said. In this sense, the French philosopher Michel Serres acutely speaks of the Platonic dialogue as the intersubjective genesis of abstraction. The intersubjective genesis of abstraction. Now moving to what am I moving here? To the sketch of the phenomenology of logos in the apology. In order to focus on Socrates' contribution to this genesis and the conception of the logical implied therein, an analysis of the early dialogues from the perspective of a phenomenology of logos, which can learn a lot from Gadamer's approach to Plato's later dialectic, seems to be a promising idea. Such a phenomenology would try to understand in which different forms and as what kind of things speech is manifesting itself in the early dialogues. The result, as I anticipated, by mainly focusing on the Protagoras, Gorgias, and the Apology, would mainly be that logos, as such, is primordially and before all specific use, a power. It is a violent, brutal power for Socrates and Plato. A power that leaves Socrates both at the beginning of the Apology and at the end of Protagoras' long speech spellbound. That's a recurring theme in Socrates and Plato, of course, that he's describing, so to say, the almost physical power and violence of rhetorical speech. More specifically, the Apology, then, is interested in seeing logos manifesting itself as a medium, as a means, and as a source within the range of three pairs of extreme possibilities the actualization of speech allows for. Firstly, logos can be used to conceal the truth, or it can be used to bring the truth to light. This is illustrated by the opposition between Socrates' defense speech and the speech of his accusers. On the one hand, the speech that we don't hear, we only see the reflection of it in Socrates' answer to it. And on the other hand, the contrast between the circulating slanders and Socrates' dialogical cross-examination of Miletus on the other hand. There are these two pairs of oppositions in the text between different types of uses of logic, which the whole text is basically very much gravitating around. Secondly, logos can be used as a means to pretend human goodness or as the only means to achieve it. This is not only thematized in the Socratic self-portrait, which we read at the beginning of this lecture, but also in those sections of the text where the Socratic dialogue is presented as a means of epimeleia heautou, hence as the means to care for oneself in the sense of caring for the soul. It is the greatest good for man, says Socrates, to discuss virtue every day and to test oneself and others in order to live a life which is examined. Examined in the sense of using logos properly in accordance to what it essentially is, a means of agreement with ourselves and others. Thirdly, logos can be used in order to found praxis and human relations on the concealment of truth and pretension of goodness, or it can be used to ground praxis in a shared interest for truth and goodness. This theme emerges as soon as we see how Socrates relates his critique of the bios politikos, a man who really fights for justice must lead a private, not a public life, to his full-fledged concept of care for the rational nature and use of things through philosophical dialogue. I think there is a quotation somewhere here. Yeah, this is the section where I'm seeing, or that passage where I'm seeing those different usages of logos converge. What shall be done to the man who has never had the wit to be idle during his whole life, but has been careless of what the many care about, wealth and family interests, and military offices and speaking in the assembly, and magistracies and plots and parties? Reflecting that, I was really too honest. I was really too honest, he says, a man to follow in this way and live. I did not go where I could do. I did not go where I could do no good to you or to myself, but where I could do the greatest good privately to every one of you. Thither I went, and sought to persuade every man among you that he must look to himself and seek virtue and wisdom before he looks to his private interests, and look to the state before he looks to the interest of the state, and that this should be the order which he observes in all his actions. Note that the Socratic dialogue is ultimately rooted in honesty and answers a question which is normative par excellence. According to which design of life can I do the greatest good to the community? once the soil of the bios politikos has turned out to corrupt the bloom of arete. It is an individualized variant of the question Socrates asks the radical immoralist Callicles in the Gorgias. Quote, what sort of man should I be and how should I conduct myself? And Socrates' answer to that is the Platonic, the Socratic dialogue, which is his way of living a life which can contribute to the community. Let me summarize briefly before we move on. We can distinguish three main dimensions of the use of logos in the apology. Speech can be used as a medium of truth or as a medium of deception. It can be used as a means of simulation or of realization of the good. And it can serve as the source of justice or the ground of injustice. In the next step of my argumentation, I will focus on the cross-examination of Miletus in order to portray the Socratic understanding of the normativity of logic in a concrete movement of thought. The defense against Miletus is often taken to be a poor display of Socrates' dialectical powers, representing an almost purely heuristic use of logos, which unintentionally unmasks Socrates to be what he denies to be, a man skilled in making the weaker argument or the worse argument the stronger. Hence, someone who uses logos as a medium of deception. In point of fact, the section deserves a close reading and an accurate analysis of the argumentative, dramatic, and philosophical text layers. Without bothering you with too many details, the following points are indispensable for a proper reconstruction. Firstly, note that Socrates is not at all primarily defending himself against the accusations, but rather attacking Miletus as the main witness of the prosecution. Secondly, note that Socrates with great care is laying down the program of his counterattack at the beginning. It consists of the proof of three theses that on the dramatic level of the piece, as a defense speech, completely destroy the credibility of Miletus, while on the philosophical level of the text, something very remarkable is happening. Miletus' lack of moral integrity is mirrored in his argumentative performance. His ethos is mirrored in his logos. His way of acting is revealed in his way of using logos. In a word, Miletus is not only revealed to be entertaining contradictory beliefs, he's rather shown to be a self-contradiction, to be someone who loses his citizenship in the space of reasons by violating its elementary ethical principles. We can read the passage in which Socrates lays down his program as an implicit reflection on the ethical principles that constitute logical integrity, as a reflection on sincerity, responsibility, and dispassionate seriousness as necessary prerequisites of the commitment to truth, regulating the argumentative use of logos. He says that I'm guilty, I'm quoting the passage, he says that I'm guilty of corrupting the young, but I say that Miletus is guilty of dealing frivolously with serious matters, of irresponsibly bringing people into court, and of professing to be seriously concerned with things about none of which he has ever cared. And I shall try to prove, the Greek text says epideixai, which is the real word for proof in Greek, that this is so. As a matter of fact, Socrates is proceeding in reverse order. First proving twice that Miletus lacks sincerity, then responsibility, and finally dispassionate seriousness. Particularly the first proof of the first thesis shows that Plato's Socrates is very interested in what we might call the ethical foundations of the space of reasons. The intangible nature of the obligations we accept when we enter the space of reasons is immediately illustrated with the first argument, which sees Socrates drawing a conclusion that uses Miletus' silence and his unwillingness to answer the question who the improvers of the youth are as a premise. You see, Miletus, that you are silent and know not what to say? Does this, namely that he's silent, that he's not saying anything, does this not seem shameful to you and a sufficient proof of what I say, that you have not been concerned with any of this? Of course, this and the following arguments are enthymemes, but that they are enthymemes means only that the average listener should be capable of adding the relevant premises on his own. The proof of Miletus' irresponsibility and frivolity are both far more explicit and carried out as careful reductionis ad absurdum, with the final argument functioning as the showdown on the dramatic and philosophical level of the text. On the dramatic level, Socrates now deals with the accusation of atheism, while on the philosophical level, he is establishing the connection between Miletus' use of logos and the ethos revealed therein. As Miletus accuses Socrates both of heterodoxy and atheism, Socrates traces Miletus' frivolous lack of dispassionate seriousness to a lack of self-control and veracity, hence to a habitual dissociation between words and deeds. You cannot be believed, Miletus, even I think by yourself. The man appears to me, Socrates says, gentlemen of the jury, highly insolent and uncontrolled, hybristes ke akolastos in Greek, which can be translated as violent and lacking self-control. Someone who's violent and lacking self-control. And finally, after Socrates has managed to combine his defense against the accusation of atheism with his proof of Miletus' frivolity, he disqualifies Miletus from the space of reason by pointing out the parallelism between the contradiction in his logos and the one in his ethos, arising in the existential gap between that, what Miletus pretends to be as an accuser, and that, what has been revealed as his irresponsible, insincere, and frivolous character. Quote, "But no one who has a particle of understanding will ever be convinced by you that the same man can believe in divine and superhuman things and yet not believe that there are gods and demigods and heroes." This is beautiful, because it represents nothing but a first Socratic formulation of the principle of non-contradiction, which will be developed much more in detail in the fourth book of the Republic. And this is no small thing. The principle of non-contradiction here is grounded in the ethical principle of logical integrity. It would take me too long, in the short time we have, to now move on from these preparatory considerations to the next stage of my interpretation, where we would envisage Socrates' defense speech as part of his ongoing endeavor to interpret the Delphic oracle in words and deeds, and recognize in him the embodiment of the ethical principles of logicality Miletus so desperately lacks. But what has been said might suffice to show that in Plato's Socrates there is a fundamental interest in establishing a harmony between the ethos of logos and the logos of ethos. How a man argues, for Socrates, is directly revealing his ethical character, while the ethos of a person is revealed in his use of speech. It is because of this disharmony between words and deeds that Socrates will focus particularly on those who claim to have arete. And claim to have arete, as he told us in his self-portrait. Now I will simply skip everything I wanted to say about purse and move immediately to the last section. These parts here would have been my parts on the theoretical framework, and so I'm immediately going, so to say, to that section where I address Peirce's understanding of the normativity of logic. So let me skip the framework and go to the point that we're interested in. Within the understanding of philosophy as the theory of the experience human beings have in common, we are ready to deal with the normative sciences by distinguishing these from the other two main branches of philosophy. These are phenomenology and metaphysics. Phenomenology precedes the normative sciences. It is the most abstract philosophical science and deals with the categories as the most universal elements of experience. Whereas, that might take too long, sorry for that. Maybe from here. Now, what does it mean that normative science treats of the laws of the relations of phenomena to ends? This is Peirce's definition of the normative sciences. And the normative sciences consist of aesthetics, ethics, and logic. What does he mean by saying that normative science treats of the laws of the relations of phenomena to ends? Normative science, this much becomes clear immediately, deals with ends, which Peirce, in the same text, tentatively identifies as truth, right, and beauty. In this sense, the definition of the normative sciences implies that phenomena do not, per se, relate to ends, such as truth, right, and beauty, but are rather brought into relation to these ends. And this bringing into relation is based on certain laws, according to which phenomena become related to ends. That which brings phenomena in relation to ends is activity. And in this sense, the basic topic the free normative sciences study is purposive or deliberate activity. To tackle this from the perspective of aesthetics, as the most fundamental normative science means to inquire into the ultimate origin of aims, purposes, and ends of activity, since these, quote, are not immanent within the phenomenon. The ends are not given in the pure experiential fact for purpose. Nonetheless, we have an interest in phenomena. We want them to conform to our ends. Thus, the question arises, whence do these arise? A difficult question which would lead us to Peirce's theory of the growth of concrete reasonableness as the summum bonum, the ultimate end which is admirable per se. In our context, however, it is preferable to tackle the normative sciences from the perspective of logic, which eventually leads us immediately to our goal, a deeper understanding of Peirce's conception of the normativity of logic and its dependence on ethics. Let me present this last step of my argumentation concisely in a sequence of numbered propositions, which represents the main elements of a line of argumentation Peirce develops in various late manuscripts. And this is, so to say, the essential kernel of his proof of the normativity of logic. First, the aim of logic is to classify arguments in accordance to an analysis of the conditions of and elements involved in valid inference. Second, every act of reasoning consists in the thought that the inferred conclusion is true, because the act follows a rule according to which, in analogous cases, an analogous conclusion would be true. Hence, to draw an inference implies the consciousness of using a pattern, the validity of which is independent of the specific content and based on a norm of inference. Third, the act of reasoning consequently implies an approval of a specific thought process as being in accordance with the norm. Fourth, approval is essentially dialogical, since it implies that a proposal is being made either to my future self or to the next, that a proposal is being made either to my future self of the next moment or to another mind. Fifth, approval is impossible without self-control and always a voluntary act. Sixth, if reasoning is essentially thought that is under self-control, it is a specific form of conduct under self-control, since all deliberate activity is conduct under self-control. Seventh, the activity to think logically is therefore a specific case of deliberate conduct and therefore governed by the same principles as moral conduct. Eighth, since ethics studies the conformity of actions to an ideal, logic as a science studying the conditions of the pursuit of truth is dependent on it. One last sentence. According to this understanding of logos, to be rational for Peirce means to be, quote, essentially self-criticizing, self-controlling and self-controlled, and therefore open to incessant question. We thus finally see that logic in Peirce's systematic framework is founded on the freedom to control ourselves. It is rooted in the dialogicality of our rational nature Socrates discovered. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I'm sorry that it was a bit confusing maybe because there was a big gap that would have taken me 10 more minutes. But I think that at least I have the feeling that I have said essentially what I wanted to say. Hopefully I'm not the only one. Thanks a lot. Yes, Dr. Switzer.
First I want to say that it's wonderful to hear you talking about the apology that we've all been teaching in 220 and all the students have been reading and so on. And, it's a wonderful analysis.
Yeah, it wasn't purpose because I wanted something that the students can relate to.
I think we should we're all away. We have this common ground.
Yeah.
My question really comes to, I actually sort of agree with you, but I wanted to play the devil's advocate and say, take for example the principle of non-contradiction. It sounds as though you're saying that the truth of that, the truth of logic, is dependent on and grounded in the ethical. And that, that would be pretty shocking to any contemporary logician.
Yeah.
They say that the goal is to have ethics and fields like that aim at the kind of objective, solid foundation of logic, rather than to say that logic is grounded in the social.
Yeah. This depends a lot on, as a matter of fact, there's definitely a simplification here in my account, but
This depends on a person's understanding of logic. And this is why I had the classification of the science. For Peirce, deductive logic belongs to mathematics. And after mathematics, we move into the philosophical science. So what he's dealing with under logic is more or less, so to say, forms of augmentative reasoning, forms of induction and hypothesis. And for this kind of reasoning, he says, you need, so to say, moral principles. Otherwise, by lacking the sincerity of the scientific ethos that you need, you wouldn't be able to be committed to long-term projects of induction, for example. So it is something which, these kinds of logical operations require an identity which is only possible in a community. So it requires the solidarity of the community of acquirement. So one of the basic things I would say at this point is to say, well, hold on, there's a distinction between deductive reasoning that according to Peirce is going on in mathematics, and that when he talks of logic, he's specifically interested in induction. But I agree, obviously. Then also his precise understanding of what the normative sciences is. What he means by ethics is, at the end of the day, not in any way applied ethics, but he always means something which is very hypothetical, in which sense, generally speaking, can actions be in accordance with aims. He's abstracted from our humanity, from everything. It is very theoretical and abstract normative science. Thanks for the question, which I think is one of the most important ones.
Thank you very much, Dr. Topa, and maybe people will think a little bit about it further, what you said, so and formulate some questions later on.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
We have almost